I'm Stephanie, and welcome to the Reading Room meets Books and Bubbly, because this video I'm going to do some quick reviews of my top 10 reads this year from this pile, and I'm not going to spoil anything in these reviews because I think they're such good books that I recommend you go read them yourself, and these are in no particular order. And since it's the holiday season, I do have some hot cocoa with rum chata instead of my typical Books and Bubbly glass of something bubbly, but this'll work. Okay, so first up is Look Closer by David Ellis. This was a 5-star read, and I can totally see why this was so hyped. I thought that this was fantastic. I was so engaged with this, and I loved every single minute of this suspenseful read. I am so glad that I kicked off the start of this year with this book, as it was such a good mystery. Ellis would drop little hints and bombshells in all the right places, and I had to speed through this because I could just not put it down. I thought it was so good. I thought it was so well plotted, and every reveal really had me questioning what was going on and made me essentially look closer at the plot and the characters. Everything came together so well, everything fit, and it was just so satisfying to see how the cons were stacking up and who's playing who. Because in this book, nothing is what it seems, and I was addicted to figuring it out, but the book was always a step or two ahead of me. I will say I was getting a bit worried at the end that it would kind of just veer off into a ridiculous twist or a gotcha moment, because the plot does get kind of complex, but Ellis delivered a great ending that brought everything home and really tied everything up really nicely. Seriously, every time we got some sort of reveal, my mind was just blown. And again, I had to keep reading because I had to know what was going on in this story. So, total 5-star read. Go read this if you haven't already. Next up was White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. So I will say I was a bit hesitant as I knew that this was YA, and YA typically puts me on the struggle bus, but I was very pleasantly surprised with this. Our main character Marigold does make some questionable choices, but she's also a teenager, and so it felt very real. The scary scenes in this had me at the edge of my seat, and it read very much like my favorite books growing up, which were the Fear Street books by R.L. Stine. This book does feature a blurb by Stine, so I definitely think Jackson was going for that vibe, and she totally nailed it. I was sufficiently creeped out by everything happening in the house, as well as the bigger setting of this rundown city that they moved to. That aspect really reminded me of Hot Fuzz in a way. And the scenes when creepy things were happening were just so well written and had my full attention. I could feel the fear and dread just dripping off the pages in this. I did think the antagonist was a bit too on the nose, especially near the end. This person would just not act this way and say these things, but overall this was a very good read. The only thing that dropped my rating to a 4-star instead of a 5-star is the ending of this. Man alive, was that an abrupt ending. In a way, it kind of felt unfinished. There were still things that needed to be resolved. I still have questions. I still want to see certain people have conversations about what really happened. I really did wonder at first if my copy had pages missing, as there were some typos and other errors in the book. But nope, it just kind of seems like the ending is just that abrupt. So, like I said, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. If you're like me and not typically a YA fan, I'd actually really recommend giving this a try, especially if you like horror and scary stories and just loved R.L. Stine growing up. This totally brought those vibes. I would definitely recommend this as a good and relatively quick read, especially for spooky season or Halloween. And it's perfectly chilling and thrilling, and I could not look away from the pages when the scary scenes were playing out, because I knew something was going to be standing there reading over my shoulder. Next up was The Vacancy in Room 10 by Seraphina Nova Glass. So I really liked this because the characters were complex, they were flawed, but so relatable. I was curious to see how our main characters, so we follow Anna and Cass, I was really excited to see how their stories would intersect. I do think I liked Cass a little bit more than Anna, as, sorry Anna, but you do make some dumb choices in this. I still understood where she was coming from, as she's grieving, and I could cut her some slack, but watching Cass grow and evolve was just so well done, so I thought her points of view were a little bit stronger. I also really loved the group of misfits that live at this apartment complex, and how they kind of just become like a found family. It was really great. I think the theme of this video is going to be me not loving some of the villains, as the only thing I didn't really love in this is our villain at the end. I got some secondhand embarrassment from their speech and actions, but really that's my only criticism of this, is the over-the-top antagonist, like his little hammy. Otherwise, I was hooked and I had to keep going back to this and blowing off all my other responsibilities just so I could read it. I really loved the mystery, I love that there were enough red herrings to keep me guessing, and the twists worked really well in this. They didn't come out of left field, and they worked with what we already knew. I also thought that this was a pretty quick read at just about I think it's under 300 pages. So I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I was entertained, and I really enjoyed this read. Next was a total 5-star read, which is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. So this was a book that was hyped on Bookstagram, and it actually lived up to the hype, which I was so excited for. Holy moly, was this good. I mean, I was laughing out loud because Lucy, our main character, isn't just sarcastic and hilarious, she is downright caustic and scathing with her comebacks and witty retorts. I absolutely loved her. I want to be her, minus being a murder suspect. I don't really want to do that part. But I love that Lucy is snarky, and it seems to come from a place of self-preservation and protecting herself. Like, I was dying reading some of her internal monologue about, like, her boyfriend at the beginning. I don't think I was expecting this to be as funny as it was. And while it's funny, as Lucy is a hot mess, so there's a lot of room for her to grow. I mean, she's pretty much like a boiling mess. Lucy constantly makes, like, terrible choices and is kind of just like, what you gonna do about it? I don't know, Lucy. Like, can we start to grow? Can we start making better choices here? So that is one criticism that I do have about the book. It does get a bit annoying later with some of the choices that she's making, as we learn certain things about Lucy and her past, because I don't know how she could act the way that she does in some scenes after we find out these certain things. On the other hand, getting glimpses into her family life and childhood, I can also cut her a little bit of slack. The mystery in this is really good, and it's not just an unreliable narrator like tee-hee-heeing about keeping a secret from us readers. Lucy has a traumatic brain injury and cannot remember what happened the night that her best friend died. And everyone is so quick to believe that she is capable of the cold-blooded murder of her best friend. Even she's kind of questioning herself. It was a really good look at how we'll avoid looking for answers because we're too scared to get them sometimes. The unraveling of what happened that night and who might not be completely honest about their accounts was fantastic. I even really enjoyed the dual perspective of the podcast interviews interspersed with Lucy's points of view, because it really helped misdirect and keep my attention focused. And my suspicions just kept bouncing between so many different characters as we get introduced to them through the podcast. Now, fair warning, there are quite a few spicy scenes in this that I wasn't expecting, given that it's about solving a murder on a true crime podcast. There are also tons of mentions of affairs, and I swear this whole town she's come from, all the people have banged each other. I hope local events are sponsored by Trojan condoms. I also have to offer a trigger warning of domestic violence, as that is covered in this. But like I said, I still gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I do have a few lingering questions, and I wanted some resolutions on certain things, as well as a bit more setup for certain reveals, but it's not enough to lower my rating. This was addictive, clever, and again, just a lot funnier than I expected a thriller to be. Next up is Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. Miranda is an auto-buy author for me, and I was really happy that this one turned out to be so great. I really love trying to figure out the mystery alongside our main girl Hazel, and I think that the pacing worked really well here with well-timed reveals of new information or an understanding of what a clue means. Like Hazel would find something, we have it sitting there, and then we understand it later. And I think that the puzzle in this came together so nicely. I also really loved that the antagonist worked with the story, but it was still a surprise when they were revealed. I had my guesses as to who was doing what, and I really liked how it all played out. I think Miranda does such a good job of creating like a tense atmosphere and that creepy like goosebumps on the neck feeling of like you know someone's watching you. I always fly right through her books as I can't look away from them, and Daughter of Mine definitely had that same feeling. I needed to understand what really happened and who knew what, and who didn't want Hazel figuring anything out. I also really love her books for their settings. I could see Hazel's dad's house, I could see the lake, I could picture the characters, and I could feel that small town atmosphere where everyone knows everyone and everyone they were ever related to. And just that feeling of like, what's gonna happen next? Like, who will our protagonist realize that they cannot trust? I also thought that the relationship between Hazel and her brothers was well written, and I can totally understand the dynamic between her and one of her brothers in that they're so similar that they just end up annoying each other. Now, I do wish there had been more time spent on the end and wrapping up some of those subplots or showing the resolution to certain things. The ending is good for the most part, but I did feel it was a bit rushed, and I wanted to see certain reunions or just get more of a resolution. I feel that there are some things that are just left hanging or are ambiguous, and I need a little bit more closure than that. So I did give this 4 out of 5 stars. It was gripping, and I just could not put this down. Miranda will continue to be an auto-buy author for me, for sure. So next up was We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kleiwer, and I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name. So this totally brought me back to my days of scrolling through No Sleep on Reddit. This was so good. It's like a haunted house story, but it's also kind of not. Like I got to some scenes before bed and had to put the book down, or I knew that I would not be sleeping that night if I kept reading. It was terrifying, and there's so much like, what the fuck is going on in this house? I think Kleiwer did such a good job with pacing and ramping up the tension because like we jump right into the story and the weirdness. And I was worried how the story would play out since the creepiness does start right away. Now, not only were the scary scenes actually scary, but some of what happens in this book is just kind of infuriating as a normal person, and I could feel that frustration. I was so frustrated right alongside Eve, our main character, and that just tells me how powerful and evocative the writing is, because I was immersed, and you could not pay me enough to go into that house's basement. No, sir. Like, there's the scene where Eve talks about basements freaking her out, and it was so real. I had that fear as a kid, too. Like, my parents finished our basement when I was old enough to remember it, and there was one room in our basement that was left unfinished, basically where we just kept all of our crap in, like, our washer and dryer. And there would be nights that I was the last one up, and using the family computer, yes, the good old late 90s, early 2000s, where we all shared one computer, and it was in the basement, and I would beat feet back up the stairs because I was so sure some demon or killer clown was right behind me hiding in the basement. And I mean like knees to chest, pumping my legs so I wouldn't be terrorized in the basement. And obviously there's nothing scary about my family's basement. It was very nice. But I was so sure that as soon as the lights turned off, a demon was going to pop out and grab my ankle. And Eve describes this fear, and it hit so close to home, and again, just helped me feel really immersed in this book. This one was also one that I could not put down and had to keep reading, even though I was scared. I also love some of like the little clues that are sprinkled throughout and how I, as the reader, really had to pay close attention and even decode or translate some things. Again, just a very immersive experience. This was a wild ride. It was suspenseful, unsettling, and at times totally unhinged, and it just really pulled me in. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. It would have been a 5-star read if it wasn't for the ending. Now, don't get me wrong, the ending is good and it fits the book. I just didn't like it. And again, there are clues in the book that you get to decode, but I wouldn't have minded a more like definitive answer to certain things that happen. I'm not necessarily mad about the ending because it does work with like all the fuckery of the house. But I think I needed a little bit more. I also think I'm kind of coming to my own interpretation or writing my own ending for it, and it seems like that's maybe what Clarke was going for. But I will say, if you're not a fan of ambiguous or open to interpretation endings, you may not love this as much. All right, next up was One of the Girls by Lucy Clarke. This was my first read by Clarke, and it will so not be my last. I absolutely loved this. The characters, the pacing, the reveals, the setting, I loved it. I mean, the setting alone made me look at how much it would cost to go to Greece in the summer, and then I had to hold back my tears and debate if a trip was worth a few months worth of my mortgage, which it wasn't at the time. But I really love the descriptions of this fictional Greek island, and I too wanted to be enjoying beautiful coastal views, a pool, and some Greek food and wine. The foreshadowing in this was done so well, and if you ever want a masterclass on foreshadowing, check this book out because she does it so well. And there were some seeds that were planted that really made me nervous as I was waiting for the reveal of what those little hints meant. Like, we get a hint at the beginning of what's to come, and then when we finally get to that scene, oh my god, it was so tense because I'm like, oh, this person's in danger. And then another hint is revealed that I'm like, oh, maybe it's not. Oh. Like, it keeps going, and oh, it's just so good. And all of our girls have secrets or are running from something or trying to face things from their past. And how it all comes together and lines up in the end, again, just so well done. You can tell that this was well plotted and well thought out. Clarke also did a great job of making these women complex, flawed, but relatable. There were times that I would be so against a character because I thought I had them figured out, and then something would be revealed that made me rethink how I felt about them, and I just think that's great storytelling. These characters are complex and so fallible, but they're also so redeemable at the same time. Now, I will give a quick trigger warning. There is a mention of SA and the R word in this, so if that's going to be a trigger for you, please stay away from that. I will also say, this being classified as a thriller, I mean, it's a very slow burn thriller then. Like, there were tense scenes, and you know some stuff is going to go down at this bachelorette weekend. But I would say this is more like suspenseful mystery than full-on thriller. But I absolutely love the suspense in this. And I loved their bonds and insights into how we change and evolve, and how we're not always going to be the version of ourselves that our friends or family might still have in their heads. This was a total 5-star read, and I am so excited to try something by Clarke again in the future. Absolutely love this. Fantastic. Next up is The Wedding People by Alison Espach. I adored this. I loved this. It's hilarious. It's moving. At times it's bittersweet, but it's also just so hopeful and optimistic, and I could not put this one down. Now, I do want to give trigger warnings ahead of time, as this book is bittersweet due to some of the heavy topics addressed in this. Some of those topics include depression, suicidal ideation, infertility, and infidelity. If those are triggers for you, go into this cautiously or just choose not to read it because you should always take care of you. But I absolutely loved this. This book it made me feel so many things. Like, one of my favorite books ever is 20s Girl by Sophie Kinsella, as that book never fails to lift my spirits or pull me out of like a funky mood. Now I think The Wedding People is going to be another like go-to when I'm feeling down and I need to feel really good about life and just, again, feel hopeful and optimistic about things. This book was absolutely amazing. It kind of reminded me of Listen for the Lie, where I was not expecting this to be as funny as it was. Again, given some of the topics that are addressed in this, I was laughing so much while reading this. Again, comparing it to 20s Girl, some of the situations that happen are just outlandish, but so comical. And the banter between the two main characters is absolutely hilarious. I loved it. I loved their relationship, and I loved watching each of their journeys as they realized certain truths about their own lives and themselves through each other. Their relationship, while it may have started in unconventional ways, was really empowering to both of them and really impactful for both of them. Like, one of my worst reads from last year, oh god, was it just last year? Yeah, it's really good actually. And I think this is what that book wanted to be or thought it was. They touch on some pretty similar themes, but The Wedding People just does it so much better. Like, Phoebe, our main character, has some problems, but she's still a lovable, sympathetic character. She's brave, kind, funny, and just isn't horrible to everyone around her, unlike Maggie from Really Good, actually. I wanted Phoebe to prevail and embrace a new version of herself and continue to live her life because she deserved it. Whereas Maggie could have taken a walk off a long pier for all I cared for. This has heart, humor, and it just really makes you think about life and that it's never too late to get what you want or do what you really want to do. I also just really liked Espach's writing style and found her writing really beautiful. This was a solid 5-star read. I loved every minute with this book. I know I will reread this again in the future, and I know I will love that reading experience too. This was a fabulous read, and I've been thinking about this one for quite a while now. In fact, I actually just gave it to my sister so she could borrow it, and she really loved it too. Next up is Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison, and this was a redemption read as I did not like cackle by her, but I had already bought this, and so I decided to read this over Halloween, and I am so glad that I did, because this redeemed Harrison for me. My god, this was so funny and so good. I loved Rory as a character. She's so witty and sarcastic, but she also knew when enough was enough. She knew when not to make a snarky retort, and never let her humor ruin a poignant moment. I absolutely loved her, and I loved her relationship with her twin sister Scarlett. Rory's story of becoming a werewolf is one that's filled with rage about what's happening to her, and how she's lost control over her body and herself. And it perfectly mirrored Scarlett's pregnancy. It's a story about change, letting go, forgiveness, and finding love, both familial love and romantic love. I also love that it's a legit monster story. Like, there's some severe body horror in this. And that it's about the idea of, do you let something control you, or do you control it? It was at times heartbreaking, but also so empowering. There are some really excellent themes in this, and I just really enjoyed my time with it, especially since, again, Rory's so funny. This was a solid 4-star read for me. There were a few things that kept it from being a 5-star read, such as some of the pacing, the dialogue, and honestly just the writing style. Harrison really employed a lot of like short, choppy sentences in this, but overall, this was a great book, especially for spooky season. Like, it's honestly very like chick lit meets supernatural as far as genres go, and I was here for it. Absolutely loved it. Okay, and coming in at number 10, but again, that rating really doesn't mean anything, is This Girl's a Killer by Emma C. Wells. I really enjoyed this. Again, I think there's definitely some themes going on with my favorite reads this year, but I really liked Cordelia, our main character. I found her fun and quirky for a serial killer. I mean, she has some serious, like, Joe Goldberg from You vibes, and went about her, let's call them after work activities, a la Dexter, by justifying it. I just loved, like, again, her principles, because again, this is something that you can't really do in real life. And I just loved how loyal she was to her best friend and like her goddaughter. She was also super snarky and sarcastic, which I obviously identify with. And she has worked very hard for the life that she has and projects exactly who she wants to be. The comedic situations in this were kind of on the zany and ridiculous side, which was kind of fun. Like, again, the book addresses some very serious topics about, like, who she is enacting this justice on, but the things that go wrong went so horribly wrong. It also kind of gave me Shopaholic vibes, because it's almost kind of like slapstick humor. It's almost like if Becky Bloomwood were to suddenly start killing bad men. It was chaotic, but it was so fun. But I will say, be ready to suspend some disbelief with this one, and if you can, you're in for a fun ride. I found Cordelia to be complex. She is quite the diva, and is slowly losing control of everything, which is kind of driving her crazy. But she has some flaws that come into play and help her grow throughout the story, so I love that for her. Now, there were times that I was annoyed with her for her behavior, but her bad choices had consequences, so that part felt very real. Cordelia had a really good balance of wins and losses as she navigates this challenging time. Now, kind of a surprise for me, I really liked the romance and was kind of annoyed that it kind of just like dropped out of the story by the end. Like, I didn't feel like there was a resolution on that subplot. And if I'm being honest, there were a few subplots that felt a little, I don't know if half-baked is right, or there were things that I think were supposed to be twists, but they weren't really a surprise. But overall, I loved this vigilante story and how Cordelia will fiercely protect her found family. She will do the tough things for others who are good and innocent. She will become a monster to take out other monsters, to bring justice to the victims and give them closure and safety. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I actually wouldn't mind a sequel, and I'm really excited to see what Wells comes up with next. So, like I said, a few themes were kind of emerging, and basically my favorite books of 2024 had snarky leading ladies who take control of their lives and live them like the badass bitches that they are. And I love that emerging theme for me, just as I loved these reads. So if you have any recommendations for great reads that I should add to my to-be-read shelf for 2025, please leave your recs in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and hope you have a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year!